She destroyed fortunes with her charm, until everything fell apart. You won't believe the ending. The city never seemed to sleep, illuminated by the lights of luxurious buildings and expensive cars speeding down the streets. Clara watched it all from the balcony of her penthouse, holding a glass of champagne and smiling. At 30 years old, she had lived what many only dreamed of, but her path was far from conventional. Her success came from her ability to turn relationships into financial transactions. Married and divorced more than 10 times, Clara left a trail of broken hearts and drained bank accounts wherever she went. Her last con had been a success. The man believed Clara was the love of his life until he discovered the betrayal and financial ruin. Now she was ready for her next victim, and she didn't have to search for long. Eduardo appeared in her life as if by fate. Eduardo was charming, with the kind of wealth Clara deeply appreciated. A millionaire and heir to an empire, he seemed the perfect target. Naive, confident, and above all, vulnerable. His fortune was immense, but his business skills were lacking. The company he inherited from his parents weighed heavily on his shoulders, and Clara knew exactly how to use that to her advantage. But she wasn't impulsive. Every move had to be meticulously calculated, like a dance where she always led the steps. So, when she met Eduardo at a gala event, Clara was strategic. She didn't approach him immediately, choosing instead to observe him from a distance, analyzing his interactions and the social circle he moved in. Her beauty turned heads wherever she went, giving her an edge, but Clara's real weapon was her ability to manipulate emotions. When she finally introduced herself to Eduardo, she knew she had already won the first battle. His gaze couldn't pull away from hers. Clara engaged him in intelligent conversation, carefully avoiding any hint of superficiality. Eduardo, for his part, seemed mesmerized by every word, making her job even easier. Eduardo started calling Clara frequently, arranging dinners at expensive restaurants and exclusive events. Each meeting was an opportunity for her to dig deeper into his life. Clara was patient. She knew emotional conquest was just the first step. The ultimate goal was always financial, and that took time. However, Clara hadn't foreseen one obstacle: Donna Heloisa. Eduardo's mother was an imposing and sharp figure. Even without knowing Clara well, Heloisa sensed something was wrong from the very beginning. Perhaps it was maternal instinct, or maybe years of experience in the business world. Either way, she was far from naive. Clara quickly realized that Heloisa posed a threat to her plan. At every family dinner, the mother-in-law watched her with a suspicion that made Clara's stomach churn. Still, Clara knew how to handle any situation, always maintaining a sweet and courteous demeanor, never showing nerves. She was used to dealing with obstacles and disarming anyone who got in her way. Yet, something about Heloisa unnerved her. The woman seemed to see through the masks Clara wore so well. When Heloisa began asking more probing questions about Clara's past, the con artist knew she didn't have as much time as she thought. The game had begun, and this time the board seemed more complex. But Clara loved a challenge. Eduardo was already deeply in love with her, which gave her a significant advantage. That night, as she gazed out over the illuminated city, Clara allowed herself a small smile. She knew she would get what she wanted once again, or at least that's what she believed. Donna Heloisa had always been a woman of strong character, someone who had learned to trust her instincts over the years. As the matriarch of one of the country's most influential families, she carried the weight of maintaining the legacy left by her late husband. Even with the empire now under Eduardo's control, Heloisa knew she still wielded considerable influence in the business, and her sharp intuition had never failed her. From the moment Clara entered Eduardo's life, Heloisa felt something was off. Clara was beautiful, charming, and charismatic, the type of woman who naturally attracted attention. but there was a coldness behind that flawless smile that disturbed Heloisa. Eduardo, blinded by love, couldn't see the danger. As a mother, this worried her deeply. At family dinners, Heloisa tried to extract more information from Clara, but the young woman was clever and avoided any direct questions about her past. All Heloisa knew were the vague fragments of stories Clara evasively provided. Each answer was adorned with dazzling charm, but nothing concrete, and that only heightened her suspicion. Eduardo, however, was increasingly blinded by passion. He spoke of Clara as if she were the perfect woman. In his mind, marriage seemed like a real possibility, and Heloisa knew she had to act before it was too late. Determined to protect her son, Heloisa decided she needed concrete evidence to tear down Clara's facade. Hiring a private investigator was easy for someone with her network of contacts. Heloisa knew this was her only chance to uncover who Clara really was. She remembered how some of Eduardo's friends had been destroyed by women with questionable intentions, and she would not let her son follow the same path. The investigator she hired was discreet and efficient. A few days after starting the investigation, he brought the first news. Clara had a dark past. Previous marriages, lucrative divorces, a series of men who had lost fortunes by her side. Heloisa held the reports in her trembling hands, feeling the confirmation of her worst fears. Clara wasn't just a woman with a mysterious past, she was a predator. The urgency to act overwhelmed Heloisa, but she knew she had to be cautious. Eduardo, deeply involved with Clara, wouldn't take this news well. Love blinded, and Heloisa feared her son wouldn't believe her without irrefutable proof. So she carefully stored the reports and began planning her approach. However, Clara wasn't naive. She quickly realized she was being investigated and understood where the threat was coming from. Her relationship with Eduardo was already strong enough for her to take action, so she took a step further, something she hadn't needed with other men. Clara decided to turn Eduardo against his own mother. Subtly, she began planting the idea that Heloisa was jealous of their new relationship. "Your mother seems so controlling, Eduardo," she said sweetly. "Maybe she's afraid of losing you. I understand. She loves you so much." Eduardo, who had never considered this before, began noticing small actions from his mother that seemed to confirm Clara's theory. With each new insinuation, he distanced himself a little more from Heloisa, creating an emotional barrier that Clara masterfully nurtured. The gap between mother and son was starting to form. Heloisa, on the other hand, saw Eduardo drifting further away, unable to see the trap being set. The evidence was in her hands, but how could she use it without destroying her relationship with her son? While Clara tightened her grip, Heloisa felt increasingly isolated in her fight to protect Eduardo. The game had only just begun, and Heloisa knew she would have to be smarter and quicker than Clara if she wanted to save her son from imminent destruction. Clara knew the real danger wasn't Eduardo. Like the others before him, he was easily manipulated. The true obstacle in her way was Donna Heloisa. The matriarch had a sharp nose for deceit, and Clara felt her penetrating gaze at every meeting. She knew she didn't have much time before Heloisa acted, so she needed to anticipate and turn the game in her favor. Eduardo, already completely enchanted by Clara, had become an easy target for her emotional manipulations. Slowly, she planted doubts in his mind, involving his mother. Clara spoke gently, never directly attacking Heloisa. "Have you noticed how she seems suspicious of me?" she would ask, always with an innocent look. "I understand she wants to protect you, Eduardo. It's natural, but sometimes it seems like she doesn't want to let you be happy." These words fell like seeds in Eduardo's mind, and, as Clara predicted, they began to sprout. The once close relationship between mother and son now faced growing tension. Eduardo, who had always trusted his mother completely, now began to question her intentions. Clara didn't stop at planting doubts. She knew she needed to be more assertive. In the days that followed, she started creating situations where Eduardo felt his own mother was trying to drive him away from happiness. Heloisa, aware of the urgency to protect her son, made a point of warning him again about the dangers of Clara. However, in doing so, she only confirmed the suspicions Clara had instilled. To Eduardo, Heloisa's concern now seemed possessive. On a tense evening, at what seemed like an ordinary family dinner, the inevitable confrontation occurred. Heloisa, no longer able to hide her concern, once again tried to open her son's eyes. "Eduardo, you don't know this woman. She has a past you need to know about. Please look at the evidence." Her voice was firm, but carried the pain of a mother who feared losing her son to an irreversible abyss. Eduardo, by now deeply entangled in Clara's web of lies, heard his mother's words as unjustified distrust. "Mom, you've always controlled everything in my life," he said, surprising Heloisa with the harshness of his words. "I finally found someone who makes me happy, and all you do is try to sabotage it." Heloisa tried to argue, but Eduardo's words cut through her like knives. He had been poisoned by Clara's manipulations, and at that moment he couldn't see the truth. For Clara, this scene was a silent victory. Every step of her strategy was working exactly as she had planned. Despite the pain of seeing her son drift away, Heloisa knew she had to continue her fight. The evidence against Clara was in her hands, but now, more than ever, she needed a careful approach. If she confronted Eduardo with more evidence too soon, it could push him even further away. And Clara knew this. As Clara kept Eduardo emotionally entangled, she also strengthened her financial hold over him. She subtly began suggesting that he needed help managing his business, questioning some of the decisions he was making. Eduardo, who trusted her more and more, began sharing more details about the company with Clara, believing her opinions were valuable. He didn't realize that with every confidence, Clara was getting closer to her real goal, the fortune. Clara, however, was aware that time was not entirely on her side. Heloisa's resistance was a threat she couldn't ignore. She had noticed the matriarch's movements and knew that the detective's reports were already circulating in her hands. While Eduardo was emotionally vulnerable, any misstep could bring everything crashing down. So Clara redoubled her efforts to discredit Heloisa. Her words now sounded firmer in conversations with Eduardo. "I just want the best for us," she would say, her voice laden with false innocence. "But I feel like your mother won't stop until we're separated. She'll never accept you having someone in your life." Eduardo, trapped in his blindness, continued to give in. The tension between him and his mother grew, like a rope about to snap. And Clara, always shrewd, prepared her next move, already visualizing the endgame she had been playing so masterfully. As Heloisa felt more emotionally cornered, Clara savored the taste of her approaching victory. But what she didn't know was that shadows from her past were beginning to emerge, threatening to destroy her plan before she could make her triumphant escape. While Clara reveled in her growing influence over Eduardo, a distant echo of her past began to materialize. Marcos, a man who had once been a crucial piece in one of Clara's early cons, had returned to the city. Their reunion wouldn't be by chance. He had been ruined by her, and now, with time and circumstances conspiring in his favor, Marcos was back with one purpose: revenge. Marcos was a middle-aged man, once prosperous, with a solid career and a comfortable life. That was until Clara crossed his path. At the time, he had been one of her easiest victims. Swayed by her beauty and irresistible charm, Marcos didn't realize the disaster approaching until it was too late. Clara had emptied his accounts, left him on the brink of bankruptcy, and disappeared like a shadow. The con left him not only financially ruined, but also emotionally shattered. Now, Marcos had rebuilt his life, though still marked by the scars of that devastating encounter. The hatred he harbored for Clara had grown over the years, fueled by the desire to one day see her pay for everything she had done. He had followed her movements from afar until a new opportunity arose. Eduardo. Upon discovering that Clara was involved with the heir to one of the country's largest fortunes, Marcos knew this was his moment to act. The first attempt at approaching came discreetly. Marcos knew he would need allies if he wanted to bring Clara down, and Heloisa was the key to that. The plan required patience, as he knew Eduardo's mother already distrusted the woman, but she would need proof to act. He had that proof, and the time to use it was approaching. Marcos arranged a meeting with Heloisa, using a trusted intermediary to ensure the meeting's security. When they finally met, Marcos wasted no time with pleasantries. "I know what you're going through with Clara," he said, watching Heloisa's reaction carefully. "I was one of her victims too." Heloisa, initially cautious, analyzed Marcos with the same scrutiny she used in business meetings. Her intuition told her he wasn't lying. "Proof," she replied coldly. "If you want me to believe you, show me the proof." And Marcos had it. Details of Clara's previous marriages, suspicious financial transfers, businesses destroyed, and the trail of bankruptcies she had left behind. He handed Heloisa documents and reports that detailed Clara's every calculated move over the years. Heloisa read each page with a mix of horror and relief. Now, she had everything she needed to expose the con artist. But Marcos wasn't there just to help Heloisa. His motivation went beyond saving Eduardo. He wanted to see Clara destroyed, as she had destroyed him. "What do you want in return?" Heloisa asked, knowing no one offers help without expecting something in return. Marcos stared at her, his gaze hardened by years of bitterness. "I want to see her pay for everything she did. I want my justice." With the plan taking shape, Heloisa and Marcos began outlining the next steps. However, they knew they had to be cautious. Clara, as sharp as ever, would notice any suspicious movement. Besides, Eduardo was deeply involved with her, and any hasty action could drive him further away. Meanwhile, Clara continued her game with Eduardo. She had noticed a slight change in Heloisa's behavior, but nothing that worried her too much yet. Clara still believed she was in control of the situation, but her intuition told her something was about to change. Marcos silently prepared his next move. Heloisa, on the other hand, was beginning to emotionally recover, bolstered by the evidence she now possessed. She knew the battle would be difficult, but she was determined to save her son, no matter the cost. And with Marcos by her side, for the first time in weeks, she felt she had a chance to defeat Clara at her own game. As tensions mounted, Clara continued unaware that the noose around her was tightening. Her confidence, however, blinded her to the imminent danger. And just like so many times before, she believed she would escape unscathed. But this time, the adversary rising against her had more than just revenge. He had proof, and he was willing to use it to bring down everything Clara had built with her lies. With the partnership between Marcos and Heloisa beginning to take shape, Clara continued her game without realizing that a new threat was approaching from an unexpected direction. Felipe, Eduardo's younger brother, had always been in the shadows, relegated to a secondary position in the family. Although the business had been left almost entirely in Eduardo's hands, Felipe harbored resentment for having been underestimated his entire life. What no one knew, however, was that Felipe and Clara shared a dark secret, an agreement that threatened to destroy everything. Felipe and Clara had met long before Eduardo even crossed her path. Their relationship started discreetly, a mutual attraction that soon turned into something more sinister. Clara, always astute, quickly realized that Felipe held deep grudges toward his brother. He felt excluded, always in Eduardo's shadow. And that made him the perfect target for Clara. That's when Clara planted the idea. What if they took Eduardo down together? If they could weaken the brother, both in business and emotionally, Felipe could finally have the control he had always wanted over the family empire. Clara, for her part, would guarantee unrestricted access to the fortune without the constraints Eduardo might impose. Felipe hesitated but was seduced by the promise of power and control. They formed a secret alliance where each would have their share of the final loot. However, like all partnerships Clara forged, this agreement was also destined to collapse. Clara's ambition was greater than Felipe's, and over time, she began to secretly betray Eduardo's younger brother. While promising loyalty to Felipe, Clara was scheming ways to take everything for herself, leaving no room for him. She planned to use him to take down Eduardo, but discard him as soon as he was no longer useful. Felipe, however, began to notice Clara's treacherous intentions. Their conversations and meetings became more tense, and distrust grew with each exchange. Clara, who once showed genuine interest in Felipe, was now distant, cold, maintaining only enough contact to keep him in her plans. Gradually, Felipe began to understand that he had been deceived. Determined to turn the tables, Felipe began planning his own revenge. He knew Clara was playing both him and Eduardo, but he still had an ace up his sleeve. Clara thought she had him under control, but Felipe possessed valuable information about her true nature. He knew about the other marriages, the previous scams, and was ready to use that information when the time was right. While Clara continued to manipulate Eduardo and tried to drive him away from Heloisa, Felipe started gathering his own evidence. He silently watched as the relationship between Eduardo and their mother disintegrated, realizing how close Clara was to achieving her goals. However, Felipe knew that to expose Clara, he had to be patient. Any misstep could alert her, and he would end up being eliminated from the game before he could get his revenge. The secret meetings between Clara and Felipe became less frequent, but each time they met, the tension escalated. Felipe pressured Clara to fulfill her part of the agreement, but she always stalled with elaborate excuses. "It's not the right time yet," she would say. "Eduardo needs to trust me completely before we make the final move." But Felipe was no longer willing to wait. He knew Clara was lying, that she had betrayed him like she had done with so many others before. Now, all that remained was to figure out how to bring her down before she could flee with everything. Meanwhile, Clara felt pressure from all sides. She couldn't fully trust Felipe. Heloisa was becoming increasingly watchful, and Eduardo, although enchanted, couldn't be deceived forever. Still, Clara continued to project an impenetrable facade of confidence and charm. The chapter reaches a critical moment when Felipe, determined to act, begins to approach Heloisa and Marcos, plotting a new path for revenge. He knew that if he revealed his knowledge about Clara and their involvement, he could join forces with them. Now, Felipe was playing on two boards. On one side, Clara, who thought she still had him under control, and on the other, Heloisa and Marcos, who still saw him as part of the family. The moment of revelation was coming, and Clara's downfall seemed inevitable. However, as always, Clara was willing to go to the limit to win. Clara felt something was shifting. The control she had over Eduardo, always firm and constant, seemed to be subtly threatened. Heloisa, despite being emotionally distanced from her son, hadn't given up. Clara knew that Eduardo's mother remained vigilant, but there was something else in the air, something she couldn't fully identify. What she didn't know was that Heloisa's allies were closer than she imagined. Marcos, with solid evidence in hand, had become a constant presence at Heloisa's side. Their exchange of information was discreet, but the tension was palpable. Clara, despite her sharp instincts, still didn't know about the alliance that had been forged against her. But that was about to change. While Marcos and Heloisa plotted a plan to unmask Clara, Felipe was taking his own steps. Feeling betrayed by Clara and now determined not to lose his opportunity, Felipe began to approach Marcos. At first, the meeting between the two was awkward and filled with distrust. Marcos knew Felipe was the brother of the man he wanted to protect, but Felipe, with his calculated calm, managed to convince him that they were on the same side. Both had been manipulated by Clara, and now they had a common goal: to expose the truth. Heloisa, initially hesitant to trust Felipe fully, began to notice his behavior and more discreet attitudes. He was no longer as distant as before and seemed driven by something more than simple ambition. The truth was, Felipe harbored deep resentment, but he was willing to set aside his differences with Eduardo, at least for now, to see Clara fall. On the other hand, Clara continued with her escape plan. The well-constructed lies she had woven around Eduardo seemed sufficient to ensure her safety, but Heloisa's threat continued to unsettle her. She knew she couldn't stay there forever. Eduardo, even blinded by love, was a risk. If he ever found out the truth, everything would be lost. Clara began preparing her exit. She planned to empty some of Eduardo's accounts, transferring funds to offshore accounts before anyone could notice. Her network of contacts was ready to help her disappear, just as she had done many times before. However, she didn't expect Felipe and Marcos to be so close to exposing her scheme. Felipe, taking advantage of his access to the family's financial information, began to discreetly monitor Clara's transactions. He knew she was preparing to flee, but couldn't act before the right moment. Marcos, for his part, gathered the final details needed to confront Eduardo directly. Heloisa, now more aware than ever of the danger Clara posed, was willing to do whatever it took to save her son. However, time was not on her side. Clara could disappear at any moment. Tensions reached a peak during a family dinner where all the key players were present. Clara, with her flawless smile, engaged in animated conversation with Eduardo, pretending to be completely at ease. Heloisa watched from afar, unable to hide her apprehension. Felipe, for his part, remained silent, waiting for the right moment to act. Marcos, from a distance, prepared for the final blow, ready to reveal everything he knew. That night, Heloisa decided she couldn't wait any longer. After dinner, she approached Eduardo, armed with the evidence Marcos had provided. "You need to see this, Eduardo," she said, her voice firm. "I know you don't want to hear it, but Clara isn't who you think she is." Eduardo, surprised by his mother's sudden approach, hesitated. His mind was torn between his love for Clara and his respect for his mother. He didn't want to believe that the woman he was in love with could be a con artist. But looking into his mother's eyes, something inside him shifted. Reluctantly, he took the documents Heloisa handed him and spent the night alone, analyzing the evidence. Meanwhile, Clara began to sense that her time was running out. Felipe, who had maintained a secret alliance with her for so long, now seemed distant, almost hostile. He barely spoke to her, and when he did, his words were laced with a calculated tone Clara knew all too well. She knew he was planning something, but didn't know what. The noose around Clara was tightening. Marcos, Heloisa, and Felipe were closer than ever to unmasking her. Eduardo, for his part, was beginning to question everything, torn between passion and the evidence laid before him. And Clara, increasingly desperate, tried to maintain control, but could feel the cards slowly slipping from her hands. The game was about to turn, and Clara knew that escape might be her only option. Eduardo spent the night wide awake, the documents scattered across his desk. The evidence provided by Heloisa and Marcos was in front of him, and for the first time he couldn't ignore it. Photos, bank statements, testimonies from ruined ex-husbands, everything was there, painting a clear picture of who Clara really was. The woman he loved, who he believed was the perfect partner, was now revealed as a cold and calculating predator. Each new page Eduardo read destroyed him a little more. His mind resisted accepting it, but the proof was undeniable. He recalled every moment he had spent with Clara, every gesture, every word, and now realized it had all been an elaborate ruse. The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming. The woman he had vowed to love had manipulated him from the start, deceiving him to get to what truly mattered to her, his fortune. While Eduardo grappled with the painful reality, Clara was busy with her own plans. She knew something was wrong. Eduardo, always so attentive, had been distant in recent days, and Heloisa seemed more determined than ever to separate them. Clara still didn't know how close she was to being exposed, but her intuition told her the time to act was near. She needed to run, and fast. She had already begun transferring part of Eduardo's money to secret accounts abroad. With just a few more days, she would have enough to disappear and start a new life elsewhere, as she had done so many times before. But this time, the pressure was greater. The feeling that the net was closing in on her deeply unsettled her. Felipe, for his part, continued playing both sides. While preparing to finally reveal everything, he maintained appearances with Clara, letting her believe he was still on her side. But behind the scenes, he was working with Marcos and Heloisa to plan the right moment to expose the entire truth. Felipe knew that with the evidence in hand, they could destroy Clara once and for all. But he wanted more than that. He wanted to see her suffer as she had made so many others, including him, suffer. The next morning, Eduardo finally decided it was time to confront Clara. He needed to hear it from her, no matter how painful it would be. He couldn't act solely based on papers. Clara was in Eduardo's living room, flipping through a magazine, when he walked in, holding the documents in his trembling hands. "Clara, we need to talk," Eduardo said, his voice heavy, trying to remain calm. She noticed the seriousness in his tone, but didn't flinch right away. She was used to tense situations and had always managed to come out on top. "Of course, love. What's wrong?" Her response was laced with sweetness, as always. Eduardo threw the documents onto the table in front of her. "What is this?" he asked, his voice faltering slightly. "Can you explain this to me?" Clara looked at the papers, and for a brief moment her expression wavered. She instantly recognized the content. It was the evidence Marcos and Heloisa had gathered against her. But her ability to lie and manipulate kicked in almost automatically. Without hesitation, she picked up the documents and began flipping through them as if seeing them for the first time. "Eduardo," she said, her voice controlled, "don't you see what this is? Your mother is desperate to break us apart. She hired someone to create these false accusations. Marcos, that man, he has every reason to destroy me. This is a trap." Eduardo hesitated. For a moment, he almost believed her again. Clara was a natural-born liar, and she knew exactly how to manipulate emotions. But something inside him, something deeply shaken by the sheer amount of evidence, stopped him from being completely fooled. "Why should I believe you, Clara?" His voice now steadier. "Do you have any idea what these documents prove? They're not just words, they're transactions, testimonies, all of it. You've tricked men before. Why would it be different with me?" Clara felt the tension rising. Eduardo was on the verge of breaking down, and she knew that if he fell completely, everything would be lost. "Eduardo, please look at me," she pleaded, moving closer. "I love you. Everything I did was to protect our love. Your mother is trying to tear us apart. She's never accepted me. Don't let her come between us." But this time, Eduardo didn't back down. He looked at Clara with a mix of sadness and anger. "You never loved me," he said, finally seeing the truth. "You only loved my money." The final blow came in that moment. Eduardo turned and left Clara alone in the room. Now he knew he had been manipulated, but Clara, sensing the imminent collapse, began preparing her escape. Marcos, Felipe, and Heloisa, knowing that the confrontation had begun, were ready for the next step. Clara, always quick to act, now had to race against time. Her empire of lies was beginning to crumble, but she still had one last move before the net closed in completely. Clara knew the confrontation with Eduardo wouldn't be the end. She had faced similar situations before and had always managed to escape. However, this time, something felt different. She sensed the walls closing in, not just from Eduardo but from Heloisa, Felipe, and now Marcos. The circle around her was tightening quickly, and Clara knew that if she didn't act with precision, everything she had built would disappear. That same night, while Eduardo isolated himself to deal with the revelation of betrayal, Clara began executing her next move. She needed more time to complete her escape. The financial transfers weren't finished yet, and leaving without the money wasn't an option. Everything she had built, all the cons, the manipulated relationships, the drained fortunes, would be for nothing if she fled empty-handed. Clara had always been good at reading people, and she knew that to buy more time, she would have to use her manipulation skills to the fullest. However, this time, it wouldn't be enough to control just Eduardo. She would have to deal with Marcos, Felipe, and Heloisa all at once. It was a dangerous psychological game, and any mistake could be fatal. Clara started with Felipe. She knew he was hurt, that he felt betrayed by her, but she believed she could turn that around. He still desired the power that had always been denied to him in the family, and Clara believed that if she manipulated him the right way, she could bring him back to her side. They had a past together, a secret Felipe still held onto with resentment, but Clara knew how to exploit his weaknesses. She found him alone in Eduardo's office. "Felipe," she said with a soft and controlled voice, "we need to talk." Felipe looked at her with suspicion, but allowed Clara to speak. He knew she would try something, but he was curious to see how far she would go. Clara approached him, maintaining a vulnerable and sincere look, just as she had done so many times before. "I know you're hurt. I made mistakes, and I know I hurt you, but we can still fix this." Felipe crossed his arms, remaining firm, but Clara's words began to affect him. "Fix it? After all this, Clara? You used me just like you're using Eduardo." Clara, always a strategist, seized the emotional opening. "I know it seems that way, but you and we were a team. You wanted the same thing I did. You wanted control, Felipe. And I can help you get it. We can still take Eduardo down together." For a moment, Clara believed she had regained control of the situation. Felipe hesitated, clearly tempted by the offer. But this time, the resentment and distrust were stronger. He knew Clara couldn't be trusted, and now there was something more important than power: revenge. "You know, Clara," he said slowly, "I won't fall for this again. Maybe you fooled me once, but now I know who you really are." Clara stepped back, realizing that Felipe wouldn't be easily manipulated this time. He looked at her with a determination she hadn't seen before. "You want to run? Go ahead, but don't think I'm going to let you take everything with you." Felipe left the room, leaving Clara alone. She realized she had lost one of her most important pawns. Felipe was no longer playing by her rules, and that meant the noose was really tightening. Clara needed a new plan, and fast, but at the same time, she knew that Heloisa and Marcos were also taking action. They wouldn't hesitate to expose everything. Desperate, Clara decided it was time to face Marcos directly. She knew he hated her, but she believed she could still manipulate his emotions somehow. The meeting with Marcos was even more tense. He looked at her with coldness, clearly expecting Clara to try playing the same game. "Did you come to ask for forgiveness?" he asked, with evident sarcasm in his voice. "Or are you just trying to buy time?" Clara sighed, maintaining her composure. Marcos, what happened between us was a long time ago. I can't change what I did, but you can't go back in time either. You can't fix what you lost, but I can give you a chance to come out of this with something. Marcos laughed, shaking his head. You think I still care about the money? I lost much more than money because of you, Clara, and now you're going to pay for that. The pressure was building. Clara felt the walls around her closing in quickly, but she still maintained control. There was one last chance, one last move she could make. She needed to escape, and fast. Her psychological game was nearing its end. Clara left the conversation with Marcos, knowing that time was up. She no longer had allies. Her escape plan now needed to be executed, and quickly. As the tension mounted, Clara prepared to disappear with whatever she could. But one last twist was still to come, something she didn't expect. The past was about to knock on her door in a way she could never have predicted. Clara was restless. All of her carefully laid plans seemed to be crumbling at once. Felipe was no longer an ally, and Marcos was determined to see her pay for everything she had done. Heloisa, for her part, remained firm, more vigilant than ever. Eduardo, though devastated by the discovery of the truth, hadn't acted against her yet, but Clara knew it was only a matter of time. Her only chance was to flee, and quickly. That night, Clara began putting her escape plan into action. She had already transferred a good portion of Eduardo's money to secret offshore accounts, but the last batch of funds still needed to be moved. She entered Eduardo's office, using the passwords he had trusted her with, and started executing the final transfer. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as her mind worked at full speed, imagining a future where she would soon disappear without a trace. But Clara had underestimated her opponents. Heloisa, after so many pieces of evidence and traps that Clara had managed to avoid, had finally made a decisive move. Days earlier, she had blocked access to the family's main accounts, protecting a significant portion of the assets. And Felipe, now acting as a kind of avenger, closely monitored the financial transactions Clara was trying to make. At that exact moment, he received an alert. Clara was trying to move funds again. The noose was complete. Clara continued in the office, engrossed in her plan, until her phone vibrated. It was a message from one of her trusted contacts, alerting her to the suspicious movements of Marcos and Felipe. They were after her. She knew her time was running out. She tried to speed up the final transfer, but as she typed in the final amount, the screen froze. Access denied. Her mind spun. The banking system had been blocked. Panic began to set in. She tried other passwords, other methods, but nothing worked. Everything was paralyzed. Heloisa had already acted to protect the family's money, and Clara was now cornered. Her attempts to flee were being thwarted. What once seemed like a sure victory was now turning into a nightmare. Without the money, she couldn't disappear as she had planned. Time was running against her. Clara knew she had no more choices. She ran to the bedroom and began gathering a few things she could take with her. Cash, jewelry, a fake passport. She needed to escape before it was too late. However, as she hurriedly packed everything, she heard voices. They were coming. Clara felt her heart race. The front door burst open, and Clara knew it was the end. Marcos, Felipe, and Heloisa entered, ready for the final confrontation. Clara slowly descended the stairs, trying to maintain her composure, but her mind was already searching for one last way out. When the three of them found her in the foyer, the tension in the air was palpable. "It's over, Clara," Marcos said coldly, approaching her. "You're not going to escape this time." Felipe, arms crossed, simply observed, an unforgiving look on his face. To him, Clara was nothing now. The allure she had once held over him was broken, and all he wanted was to see her downfall. Clara, however, wasn't one to give up easily. Even when cornered, she maintained a steely gaze. "You think you can stop me? You don't know what I'm capable of," she replied, with a hint of arrogance in her voice, as if there was still a small chance for victory. But Heloisa, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward with the firm posture of a matriarch who had never lost control. "You've already lost, Clara," she said calmly. "Everything. The money, Eduardo, your freedom. There's nowhere left for you to run." Clara knew Heloisa was right, but her survival instinct was fierce. In a final, desperate act, she tried to rush past them, to run through the front door and escape. But Marcos, quick as lightning, blocked her path, grabbing her arm firmly. "You're not going anywhere." At this point, Clara knew her options were gone. She looked around, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on her shoulders. Her mind, once so sharp, now seemed clouded by frustration and loss. Everything she had built with her lies was collapsing before her eyes. Suddenly, however, something unexpected happened. A car screeched to a stop in front of the house, and out stepped a man Clara hadn't expected to see again, someone from her distant past, whom she believed she had left behind. An old lover, perhaps the first victim in her long career of cons, had returned. He exited the car with a grim expression, bringing with him secrets and revelations Clara could never have imagined. The past had finally caught up to her, and what once seemed like a simple game of escape was now taking on even darker proportions. The consequences of her actions were about to unfold in a way Clara had never anticipated. The sudden arrival of that man made time seem to stand still. Clara, already cornered by the presence of Marcos, Felipe, and Heloisa, now found herself face to face with someone she thought she had left behind long ago. The man, her first lover, and also the first victim in her long history of cons, had returned. His face bore the marks of resentment and pain that time had not erased. And with him, Clara realized, the past she thought she had buried was about to explode. The man, named Roberto, walked slowly toward the entrance of the house, his eyes fixed on Clara. The silence among everyone present was suffocating. Clara couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had left Roberto bankrupt and emotionally devastated years ago, and now here he was, back, apparently to finish a cycle that had started long ago. His presence brought a new threat to Clara, something she hadn't anticipated. "Roberto," she whispered, trying to maintain her composure, "what are you doing here?" "You thought you could escape forever, Clara," he said, his voice firm but laden with bitterness. "You thought you'd never have to face the consequences?" Clara took a deep breath, trying to calculate her next words, but she knew she was losing control of the situation. The eyes of Felipe, Marcos, and Heloisa were all on her, and now Roberto was yet another piece on the board she didn't know how to move. For years, Clara had prided herself on always being in control, but at that moment, her mask was finally starting to slip, and the weight of all her past actions was beginning to crush her. Marcos, impatient, took a step forward. "This needs to end now. You've manipulated us for long enough, Clara." Roberto interrupted. "She destroyed me long before she got to you, and I never fully recovered, but now I have what I need to settle the score." Clara felt her heart race. There was more to this visit. Roberto had brought more than just a thirst for revenge. He seemed to have secrets that could change everything. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to sound composed, but her voice trembled slightly. Roberto pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "Here are the documents that prove the true origin of the money you've hidden over the years, Clara. Transactions you made without anyone noticing, involving people who are now willing to expose your entire web of cons. If you thought Eduardo and Felipe were your big prize, think again." He threw the envelope onto the table in front of everyone. "The evidence is here. And if you thought you could get away with this one last time, you're sorely mistaken." Clara took the envelope with trembling hands, her mind spinning with a whirlwind of thoughts. How had he gotten this information? She had been so careful, covering her tracks at every turn, and now it seemed like her entire criminal career was about to be exposed. She quickly skimmed through the documents, panic rising as she read about the bank transactions, the offshore accounts, and the details of each victim who had fallen into her trap. Heloisa, who had been silently observing everything, finally stepped forward. "Clara, you think you're unbeatable, don't you? You thought you could fool everyone and get away scot-free. But the truth is, no matter how much you toy with people's lives, the lies always come to light." Felipe, now standing beside his mother, crossed his arms. "I should thank you for showing me what really matters. It's not the money, it's not the power, it's the truth. And your truth has finally been revealed." Clara, realizing there was no way out, let the envelope slip from her hands. The weight of her actions seemed to finally catch up with her. For years she had played with people's trust, love, and lives, believing she could get away with every con. But now, with all her enemies gathered around her, Clara found herself without any more cards to play. "So this is it," she muttered, without her usual arrogance. "You're all going to destroy me," Marcos replied coldly. "We don't have to. You did that yourself." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara finally understood that her reign of lies had come to an end. All those she had deceived, manipulated, and betrayed were there, ready to witness her fall. But the final blow came when Eduardo walked into the room, his eyes filled with hurt and disillusionment. "Clara," he said, his voice low but firm, "I loved you. I believed in you. But now I see who you really are. There's nothing left to say." With that, Clara knew she had lost everything. Eduardo, the last thread keeping her in the game, now saw her for what she was, a liar, a con artist who would finally face the consequences of her actions. Clara tried to hold his gaze for a moment, but there was nothing more she could do. Roberto, Marcos, Felipe, and Heloisa left the house, leaving Clara alone with Eduardo for a brief moment. He looked at her one last time, without saying another word, and then walked out, closing the door behind him. Clara, now alone in the center of her crumbling empire, finally felt the weight of her choices. There was no more escape, no more manipulation. Her downfall was complete. And so ends the story of Clara, the con artist who believed she was in control but ended up becoming the victim of her own lies. What did you think of this twist-filled ending? Do you think Clara deserved a second chance, or was her fall well-deserved? If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button now and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. We have plenty of intriguing stories coming your way. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think of Roberto's appearance at the end? Did you expect someone from Clara's past to come back and confront her? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read and respond. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.